You're going to pop up just 2 weeks before the pay-per-view. You return on July 11th, 2007. That's a draft episode of Monday Night Raw in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And everyone remembers this episode for when Vince McMahon blew himself up in a limousine and what I believe was also Vince McMahon Appreciation Night. What do you remember of this night?
I was really upset about it. I was upset about it. I know once we talk about the match, we'll jump forward to that next day, which was one of the most tragic days in wrestling history. But before those events, and we're talking about the Benoit events, began to unfold, I had about a 45-minute talk/shouting match with Mr. McMahon because I hated that angle. Because at the time I was doing quite a bit with injured service members, and I was always working with kids who were facing challenges, and including imminent deaths. And I remember him. It was crazy because going back to the episode where I did kiss Vince's butt, right, following the I Quit match with Rick. We're live. We're backstage, but it's a live interview, so we can't cut. And I called him Vince, and he said, "What did you call me?" And I thought, this is a trick question. I said, "Vince?" And he looked at me. I didn't realize that you were supposed to refer to him as Mr. McMahon when he's on camera. So when I have the conversation with Vince after the day after Vengeance, which we'll get to talking about, and I know we're kind of all over the place, asking people to bear with us. I'll tell you, he gave me 45 minutes of time, and a lot of it was yelling. I remember saying, who does think you're dead? A child who's, who is, I don't know, child facing challenges and the prospect of death. You know who else thinks you're dead? A U.S. service member who lost both her legs. These are people coming up to me asking about you. And he goes, "Mick, Vince McMahon didn't die. Mr. McMahon died."
Oh.
And I went, "Do you think our fans know the difference?" He goes, "Of course they do." And I'm thinking back to where I called him Vince, and clearly I did not know the difference. Like, right. I wasn't aware there was a Vince McMahon and a Mr. McMahon. And when I saw the Full Gospel Tabernacle come in, they were supposed to be celebrating his death. Like, you were going to have a certain death service, memorial service. Was it San Antonio or was it? We had the pay-per-view in Houston.
That's right.
So I don't know if we were in San Antonio or Corpus Christi the next day. I think it may have been Corpus Christi. And I was like, I don't know if I demanded that I leave, but it was probably more along the lines of, "Nick, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to be here." And so I took off, and I missed out on all the tragedy that unfolded. As do you want to go? Do you want to go back to Vengeance, and we'll
Yeah, we'll get there. Okay. But you're all right. It was in Corpus Christi, Texas, the very next day, June 25th. The thing that made me laugh about the Mr. McMahon Vince McMahon thing. Do you recall way back when Hulk Hogan was suing Gawker, there was a discussion?
Yes.
Something he said on the radio.
Okay.
He goes on Bubba the Love Sponge back in the day. Of course, that was a big piece of the story. And
sure,
there's a conversation where he's on the show, the radio show, Shock Jock show, and he says that Hulk Hogan has a certain length piece of male equipment.
Right.
And then when he's quizzed about that on the stand, he has to say, "I do not have a certain length piece of equipment." And he says his real name, Terry Bollea's piece of equipment, is not so-and-so size, but Hulk Hogan's is. And it tickled me then, and it tickles me now. Mr. McMahon is dead. Vince McMahon is alive.
Oh, man.
Something that Mr. Balea maybe doesn't. Amazing.
The closest I can come to that is Mick Foley can't sing. Dude Love can sing.
Well, I like
he's a change of character. That's a little bit different than the piece of equipment. I don't
Yeah.
even know how that's physiological and possibly. It's not possible. But
I
that
think
was
it's also how Ric Flair was billed as being 6'2" or 6'1", and he's 5'10" or whatever.
Yeah, I thought he was a 6-footer, wasn't he?
I don't think so. Maybe I don't know. Maybe he went the Mick Foley route and he shrunk a little. I don't know. The Vengeance show here is subtitled Night of Champions before it becomes its own pay-per-view the following year.
Right.
And on the Raw where you returned, they set it up by saying anyone still on the Raw roster at the end of the night who was a current or former world champion would be eligible for an open WWE Championship match at Vengeance. Of course, you come out, announce yourself for the match. So that's kind of weird in hindsight.
Man, yeah, it is a little strange. The line that resonated with me is, does he have any real friends?
Yeah.
Because I'd always been told, like, he's, so busy and immersed in work. He doesn't have any hobbies. Work is his hobby. So I have to believe he's, it's a tough transition. I'm sure he sees his grandchildren all the time. I'm lucky that I'll be one of the hosts of the new season of Most Wanted Treasures. I don't even know if I'm allowed to announce that, but me, Lita, and Booker are going to be hosting that show. And because my mom only lives an hour and a half away from Stamford, where some of the shooting is done at the warehouse, I'll reach out to Vince and see if he wants to get together for a lunch or something. And I'd like to keep in touch with him. He wasn't a perfect man, but man, Conrad, without Vince's belief in me, we're not doing this podcast, right?
Right.
Like no one's doing a podcast with me based on having a fairly good run from 91 to 94 in WCW. So I owe a lot to Vince. He wasn't a perfect man. I still maintain he was a great man with a couple of flaws. And so it's really interesting to look at that. And it's interesting to see how often I was referring to him as Vince McMahon, not knowing that by that point he wanted to be Mr. McMahon exclusively.
So when the show goes off the air, Vince McMahon has been blown up. And as we said, it creates, a reaction unlike any before. There's a famous story that Donald Trump even called the office about it. And the next week in Richmond, Virginia, this is where the Umaga squash happens. You open the show and do an insincere promo saying, boy, in hindsight, with Vince being dead and all, my comments last week kind of came off kind of bad. And then here comes Randy Orton. What do you remember about this?
Nothing. I don't remember that at all. Because I think because I was so upset about the Vince thing, that these other anything past that is not something I would have committed to memory.